Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on risk management and your agritourism business. We're glad you could join us today. We've got a lot of great information for you on managing the risk in your agritourism businesses. Just a couple of reminders before we get started. You can type in questions into the chat box at any time. Also, you can type in comments as we go along. We'll try to answer most of those questions at the end after we hear from all three speakers. So thanks again for joining us, and let's get started. So this is Madeline Schultz, and I'm the Women in Ag Program Manager at Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, so I'll be your moderator for today. We have three fantastic guest speakers today, and I'll introduce them now, and then as they come up into the program as well. So our first guest speaker is Nanette Gigi Neal. She is an Ohio State University Extension educator for agricultural natural resources based in Claremont County, Ohio. Gigi specializes in farm business management with a focus on women in agriculture programming. She's also on the leadership team for the E-Extension Women in Ag Learning Network and is a fundamental leader for one of the 9 extension education research areas in Ohio. So welcome, Gigi. Next we have Christy Welch, and she is also with the Ohio State University, and where she is a direct agricultural marketing specialist. She also serves as farmers market specialist with the business team to provide business training to farmers markets and their vendors and producers. Christy and her husband own and operate Welch Farms, LLC, in Ross County and are actively involved in the Chillicothe Farmers Market, where she has served on the board for the past 7 years. In addition to the farmers market, they also have pick your own and retail sales on the farm. So welcome to Christy Welch, and thank you again for being here today. Our third speaker today is Christy Leeds, and she is also an extension educator for the Ohio State University. Christy, along with her husband Rob, own and operate Leeds Farm in Ohio. They open their farm each fall for pumpkin field trips and many other guests to enjoy fall family fun on the farm. Christy's interests include family activities, 4-H, agri-entertainment, and pumpkin farming, reading good books, eating good food, traveling occasionally, and to top it all off, she is waiting to be called for Dancing with the Stars. So welcome to you, Christy. Glad all of our speakers could join us. So I am now going to turn it over to Gigi Neal. And Gigi, thanks again for being here, and we'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Madeline. First of all, I'd like to preface this with, I've got a short period of time. There's a lot of information to cover, so if you have additional questions, please feel free to email me at the information that's provided on the first slide. Talking about risk management in your agritourism business, and we're talking about pick your own activities. Strawberries, we've got different events that go on at agritourism for cow trains, and then we might have a maze that occurs, whether it's a corn maze or a hay or a straw bale maze. And then of course we have the creative events of building straw activities for them to possibly climb on. And then we might have a wagon backing event, or we might be taking a straw bale ride. But first of all, what is risk? Risk is the chance of injury, damage, or loss to a person, property, or reputation as a result of participating in an activity. So regardless of what that activity is, we take risk every day. So those of us that, we don't have a risk sitting here today at our desk or watching these monitors. It's a very low risk, but we do take the chance every time we get in our vehicle. That's a risk also. So risk management is a discipline for dealing with the possibility that some future event will cause harm to people, property, income, or organizational goodwill. And risk management is a continuous cycle. Everything happens for a reason, and so we need to evaluate, we need to acknowledge it, we need to establish it, And every time something happens, something else is going to occur also. So keep the cycle going. But we need to recognize, so we need to identify, analyze, and assess those risks. So one of the things in this picture is that they've analyzed the risk. They've put a cage around using a hay wagon that's got a kicker, probably had a kicker wagon or a baler in front of it, using that to help minimize the risk necessary for them to have their hay ride. And then we want to manage. We want to think of an acronym called CAMES: Control, Avoid, Minimize, Eliminate, and Share. And with those, we can kind of take a chart and make it low risk, high risk, low frequency, and high frequency. We can kind of picture some of the different activities that we have. So one, we're all sitting, as I mentioned earlier, probably at a computer screen and at our desk listening to the event, so it's low frequency and low risk, and so we can retain that program. But then we have activities like we have a lot of people going on, so we have a lot of frequency, and we have a low risk. So yeah, pick your own pumpkins and pick your strawberries is a risk, and we need to reduce that. And one of the things that I noticed on some of the different pick your own event activities is that, on the Leeds farm, and Christy may talk about this later on, something I noticed that they do is that they pick the pumpkins and bring them up front for you instead of going out in the field. So they help reduce that risk so that people aren't tripping over dirt clods, tripping over vines and things like that. But then they have a zip line. So it's a low frequency, but it's a high risk. So we got one person on there, but it is a high risk because they're up in the air. I'm sure that they have a lot of sign-off forms and liability that they have to take care of before they put someone on the harness. But then, of course, we have things like pesticide treatment. So that's a high frequency and a high risk, and we want to try and eliminate those events. So let's look at CAMES, the acronym for CAMES, and controlling those risks. So some ways we can do that with our agritourism is that we have school groups that come out. We have youth groups, we have 4-H programs, we have different people that just visit. If they're maybe have a permission form for them to fill out. And of course, supervision is most important. If they're coming out with a school group or a youth group, you've got other adults that are there with those programs to help supervise them. So if it's the family just coming out, of course we understand that supervision should be upon the parents or the guardians. And behavior management, being calm around animals if there's a petting zoo. So you might have your employee or stand there to make sure that people aren't picking on the animals or running around and yelling and screaming, because we want to make sure that the behavior of the animal is not reflected upon the behavior of the human being. And then with your employees and volunteers that work for your organization, we might need to look at child abuse and neglect training and standards of behavior. And then we want to look at avoid. We want to avoid certain risks. That one-on-one population where we're working with minors or a vulnerable population. We want to avoid that risk at all costs. We want to try and plan safe events and activities. So the little boys that are down here in the picture leaning over the water could possibly fall into there. And we want to try and avoid that. And then we've also got the weeds over here. So if you've got an activity where you know that people are going to be walking, especially if it is a pick-your-own type item or a walking trail or something like that, you want to make sure that you remove those weeds. Number one, it's going to help control insects. Number two, it's going to help control any type of poison plants that might possibly be in there. So you want to remove those items the best as possible. To go on a personal note, this weekend I happened to be at a state park here in Ohio helping with a cleanup event. And this family was camping there, and the girl was on the dock fishing. Next thing I know, I hear a big splash. And she's in the lake. Dad runs over, leans over and picks her up, and he's calm. She's scared to death. Come to find out, she didn't know how to swim, but she was on a dock with no life jacket on. And growing up on the river here in Ohio, and growing up around boats and everything else, I knew that, a life jacket is something that everybody should wear regardless of the situation they're in, as long as they're around water. So we want to minimize risk too. And even though we can take every precaution and get every permit and get everything signed off, we're still going to have some people in our homeowners associations or neighbors or whoever else that might be grumping and fussing. So we want to try and make sure that we're following all the proper protocol. We've got everything in place, training, certificates. But every once in a while you might have some rude people put up some signs, or you might have one of these signs of your own, but I'm sure you've seen these signs, different ones on Facebook. So then we want to eliminate the situations. And eliminating, we've got the rock, the ledge over here with people sitting on it. This brings something that just happened last week in Ohio. A boulder fell onto a main highway. And it was about the size of a small house. They said roughly like a 20 by 20 by 40 rock that fell. Hit a 4-lane highway. Luckily, no one was hurt. So these people sitting up there on that ledge, who knows what could happen if that thing would crack, or if there's no railing there, they could fall off. Then we have the lady down here with the Annie Oakley type event that looks like it's occurring. She's on a horse with a pistol, shooting at something. So we want to make sure that whatever she's shooting at, the people that are sitting around are not going to be part of her, hopefully, rubber bullets. Then we have things like hay rides. So we want to try and eliminate that, because most of the time we get up on a wagon, we dangle our feet, we go for a ride, or even if we're moving from field to field, we want to make sure that we try and reduce that risk the best as possible, whether it's to put the straw bales in the middle so that everybody has to sit in the middle and their feet are up on the bed, or get something that's got a rack around it like this one does, or the previous picture, where you've got everybody contained and hopefully you won't have any incidents. And then we have the lady with the, looks like it's a disability tractor where they're trying to get someone on there, but she's just kind of hanging there in the air. So we want to try and reduce those risks and get to, use the equipment to its best needs. And then we want to share in those risks. And we want to share that risk not only with the person that's involved, but also, contracting and having insurance. So it's important things for us to have. Contract is a written or an oral agreement between two or more parties. So if you have these agritourism items and you are on that high-risk event, then you need to make sure that people are filling out liability forms and contracts with you. So if you happen to have that zip line as one of your programs, then you might need to do that. But if it is a pick-your-own type event, you may not need to have that liability or have them sign that contract. But then there's different types of insurance to have. So you've got property and casualty, you've got health, life, and disability insurance, and then also liability insurance. And it is, I won't say expected, but it is encouraged that you have coverage for every single one of these items. So risk is what makes it possible to make an effort. If there was no risk, there would be no return to the ability to successfully manage it. So we want to operate with risk management in mind. So we want to manage our production risk. What is our outcome, and what do we plan on yielding from this? Manage our marketing risk transforms production into financial success. It's a global market. Everything we do is out there, especially if we're using social media to market or internet, the World Wide Web. That's why it's called that. All of our information is out there, so we want to manage those risks of marketing. We want to manage our financial risk, threaten the financial health of the business. So if we don't pay attention to what we're putting in and what we're getting out as our inputs and outputs, we could have difficulties with moving forward. We want to manage our legal risk. Day-to-day activities involve commitments with legal implications. You never know what's going to happen. We want to try and eliminate them the best as possible, but we do know that whatever occurs could have legal ramifications. And we want to manage our human risk, the source of business and part of strategy with dealing with risk. So we are all human. We have humans that are working for us in these agritourism businesses, and we want to make sure that we manage those the best as possible. And then, of course, we always have these emergencies that come about. This one happens to be, they're pulling a stock trailer and the truck broke down. But, if we have that youth group that comes in, of course, we want to make sure that that school has those health forms. We want to make sure that there's phone contact, especially for our employers or employees that are working there. We want to make sure we have the same information for them as we would expect for the groups that are coming in. And then transportation involved, use-specific travel permission forms. So not necessarily, it might be more like a canoe livery where they have to transport them from the main hub out to the lake area or the river area. So there might be some transportation travel forms that have to follow for something of that nature. And then, of course, weather. Farmers are notorious for wanting to tempt that fate with Mother Nature. So we want to make sure that when we hear thunder, we need to get inside and we need to take care of that personal risk. Because as you can see from this picture, farmers were flirting with lightning, and unfortunately, lightning got too close to the fence, and then the cattle were also close to that fence. So if we have our event and our activity and we are outdoors, we want to make sure that if we hear thunder, we move inside. And moving inside does not necessarily mean a shelter like what is down here in the bottom right-hand corner. It's okay, but it's not what is expected. A four-sided building with a roof over top of it is what people need to be moving into. And then also, if it happens to be that you have nothing like that, then get into the car. Get into something that's got a roof over top of it. And then develop a plan. What if something does happen? What is our emergency crisis plan? We need to have that in place. You never know when, a storm is going to come through, a fire. You never know if something's going to happen. So get everything wrote down and have it in a location where you can go and find that quickly and immediately. And anybody can pull the information down from there and know what the protocol is and know who to call. So information that I gained is from the Introduction to Risk Management, Understanding Risk from the North Central Extension Research Risk Management Education Center. And we hope that everybody has happy rainbows like what we see here, but that we know that isn't always the case. And so some additional tools and resources that you can use are from these different websites. And then just these are where I gather some other items and information.
Thank you very much, Gigi. And you can see that Gigi has her contact information here in this PowerPoint, which will be available after the webinar, so that you can contact Gigi directly if you have questions. Thank you so much, Gigi, for that introduction to risk management. You've given us a lot of good ideas and things that we can look at in our agritourism businesses or our future agritourism businesses. So next I'd like to go to Christy Leeds, and she is going to talk with us more about planning for emergencies and her own agritourism business as well. So thanks again for joining us, Christy, and we'll let you take over from here.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me just fine?
We can. Thanks for checking.
Okay. All right. I'm going to speak mostly from the perspective just kind of trying to give examples because I think everyone's then hopefully able to kind of apply them. We have very diverse businesses in agritourism. Oftentimes very unique kinds of activities going on the farm, around the farm. So I'm going to give kind of a little bit of topical information about a couple of things to think about, and then some specific examples as they apply to us that you can hopefully translate to your operation. So some examples of the ways in which we manage risk. First one that I think about is thinking about physical facilities. In many cases, that's barns, all kinds of other structures and all sorts of things that we might be doing activities in and around. And then we think about the mix of that and people onto the farm. So I think often about things like signage that's been mentioned earlier, but signage is really important to try to communicate to your guests where to go and where not to go is fairly fundamental. Keeping aisles open or any kind of area that clear that people are supposed to move in and out of, particularly in an emergency. Another example would be lighting. What would happen if something as simple as the power goes out while people are in the structure, particularly an older structure like a barn. A power outage is generally speaking not a major emergency, but it can become an emergency if people don't have any way to get out of there, and it's a structure they're unfamiliar with, and where do we go? And so something as simple as lighted emergency exit signs become really important in what is generally kind of a simple thing that happens pretty routinely for some of us. Paths and driveways are another area where, again, you're inviting people to move about the farm. Is it clear where they're supposed to be? Do you separate vehicle traffic from pedestrian traffic very clearly, or at least warn people when they're walking into a path of vehicles, things like that. Another one in terms of facilities that we deal with frequently on the farm is if you, as a farm, if we invite people to, or kids especially, to play on certain kinds of structures, then how do we also indicate when it's not okay to be on other types of equipment that should be out of sight or not accessible or that kind of thing? But from a child's point of view, or to many families' point of view, if they can play on this thing over here, why can't, it seems obvious I should go over there and get on that tractor as well. So those kinds of things we have to be really aware, I guess, pay attention to in terms of physical things. Another aspect of risk management that we mentioned already is employees. I guess if I had to summarize related to employees is we have to protect them and we have to train them. All kinds of protection issues kind of come up: ear protection, eye protection, hand protection. In our case, and in many farms, young people are doing a lot of different kinds of things. They may be running power equipment, they may be driving vehicles, they may be using power tools, even things like chainsaws. And if you read the requirements or the suggested training for some of those kinds of things like chainsaws, a lot of people as managers, as owners, aren't providing some of the kinds of equipment that is suggested, recommended, or required for operating some of those kinds of things. So there's just lots of things. We very simple, fundamental thing. We buy a lot of gloves. Our employees don't show up with gloves on. You're going to see a picture later at the end here, and I'm going to point out to you that the gloves that they're all wearing, they didn't arrive with. We provide them. It's just simple kind of thing that if they don't have it, they're either going to be injured, they're going to have splinters, they're going to have problems that are not so simple to deal with. And then the other side of this is training. Training relates to nearly everything we do in our operation. Obviously, we don't throw people out there, on the fly kind of thing. We do a lot of training in certain areas. Gigi mentioned zip line, and that's an obvious one. They go through very specific training. The picture you see here on the right is one of our employees standing on the edge of the zip line. You notice the harnesses, that kind of thing. That person has been well trained to be up there and to be operating that particular thing. But there's a lot of other things that we do and that employees engage in that we have to train very specifically for how we want them to operate it, what they can do, what they cannot do, what the specific language that they have to say to each and every person in some cases as they come through. It's almost like a script to operate some activities. Um, I'll just give another example. A couple years ago, when our son was in that 15, 16 age group, we had a lot of his peers, a lot of friends that were working, that were becoming employees. A lot of them thought they should drive hay rides. So we had to enact a policy very quickly to say you must be 18 to drive a hay ride. It negated the option completely that they were going to go out and decide that they would take over for a hayride driver during a lunch break or something. And so we put those kind of policies in place and require that they have the training or certain skill levels, whatever, to do certain tasks on the farm. Managing for emergencies, and these can be all kinds of things. Gigi talked a lot about storms kind of thing, but there's all sorts of them that we try to think through. What happens if something occurs? We have to do a lot of employee training. What happens if somebody has a heart attack while they're on the farm? What happens if someone is injured in some other way? What happens if there's fire, or there's just a lot of different kinds of things. We train through in our employee training, some what ifs, what to do if, where certain kinds of things are. A simple example, again, is fire extinguishers. Number one, we have them. Number two, we certify them every year. That means we take them all down and take them to the fire department and have them redone. That's one thing that once people buy them, they don't often think about having them actually in working order. And number three, do people know how to use them? Do you train employees to use them? So that's it seems like a very simple one. You see fire extinguishers everywhere. In a lot of places, I think we're up to 22 or whatever by fire department standards that are all over the farm. The other kind of, just as an example that we think about is, should you have to call for emergency services, meaning a squad or fire department, to assist with some kind of emergency, how do they get in there? How do they get into the farm? What's the access point? Do employees know how to open up that access point? Do the first responders know how to get to you? So all those are the kinds of things that we sort of plan for. We think through. Here's the key people and what are their role and how do they get there. Another common example is if it's something not quite so urgent, but something happens, somebody gets a bee sting, whether visiting the farm or that something kind of thing, and they decide they need to access an emergency service. They're going to go to urgent care or something like that, not a life-threatening emergency. Do you have directions? And they're from out of town, they're not from the area. Do you have directions or those kind of things available to get them to access the help they need quickly and efficiently? So those are all the kinds of things. Anybody who has people and potentially has emergencies should have an incident report form. Again, it's kind of a fundamental, and it's essentially just writing down who, what, where, what happened, what occurred, what was done about it. So you kind of keep track of that information, and you think to write it down at the time. So it's just a kind of a fundamental process of managing risk that everybody should have. Another part of agritourism that many of us deal with are animals, and the animals come with their own entirely, specific set of ways in which you're probably going to manage risk. The first one that comes to mind for us, and for many animals, we have both equine and swine, and for us that means double fencing. That means that guests will not be able to put their hands in a pen. The picture you see here happens to be a sow and litter that we had on the farm last year. It's a really cool thing. It's a wonderful thing for people to be able to see, but as you can sort of tell in that picture, it is double fenced, so a toddler can't put their hand through the fencing there. You can see it really clearly, but you can't get to it. The other sign I think is too hard to see, but we have donkeys. This is another example. Again, people don't come in direct contact. They can see the donkeys. They can actually feed the donkeys through a tube type thing, but they can't put their hands in where the donkeys can bite. So those are just examples of strategies that you can use where you can do it, but you can do it safely. There's lots of examples of signage and other kinds of things. I'll give you a next example here. Is animals also then mean hand washing. You have to provide hand washing and not just provide it, but also set your area up in such a way that people are going to be hard pressed to miss it. I don't know, there's maybe a better way to say that, but I mean, see some CDC recommendations here that not only is it there, but people almost have to do it. So not only does your signage tell them that they need to wash their hands, but they've got to pass by that area ideally in order to get out of the animal area. Those are examples of our hand washing sinks. We have 8 faucets, and they're busy constantly, pretty much full time. And there's soap and hand towels, hand washing. There's 8 sinks there in that animal area. So that's just an example of a way to mitigate risk. If people are going to have access to animals, then you've got to provide the rest of the opportunity to wash up, be clean. Another example of just another area or category of risk might be labeled equipment failure. We work with lots of different kinds of equipment. Hayride wagons would be an example. They've got to have safety chains. Other types of equipment like the zip line needs to be inspected on a regular basis. Just giving an example, in our case, the zip line is officially inspected by a certified people that have the thing, and they provide an inspection report and those kind of things. So some areas of the farm have that type of opportunity to have that system. We also, another example that we're not required to do, but we do it anyway, fire inspection. There's a fire inspector locally, and any place that has a fire department, we all do. They will come out, even though we're not required to do that. We do it anyway. We ask them to come and walk through a very thorough fire safety inspection with them, and we implement some of the things they recommend, even though, again, we're not required to, but we do it anyway for our own protection. Another thing is equipment failure in terms of activities that you have. It may be your credit card machines. It may be whatever it is that you rely on. The example given here is our jumping pillow. If it goes down, if it stops operating, can we fix it quickly and be back up and running? Do we have on hand the kind of stuff that to make a quick repair and keep going? And so that's just another example of you can think through things ahead of time and think, what if, our credit card machines are down? Do we have a system to keep up and running, or any other piece of equipment that we're relying on? Can we have on hand or some way to take care of that problem and keep things up and going and keep things safe? So as I mentioned, here's the picture on the right. I'll just point out when I mentioned gloves, that is our pumpkin picking crew. They're standing in front of a just picked trailer of pumpkins. And if you notice, if you look closely, every single one of them has gloves on their hands, because if they didn't, their hands would be really hurting at this point. So that's just an example of we provide, some of the safety, some of the equipment that's needed, and you have to think through those things on behalf of some of your staff, particularly younger staff. So those are some examples from our perspective of the world, and I'll have to field questions later as we come to it.
Thank you so much, Christy. That was a lot of really valuable information, and definitely some interesting things to think about there, from the fire extinguishers to the double fencing, lots of interesting things. If you do have questions, those of you in our audience today may type them into the chat box. Also, we're interested in your comments on our presentations as well. We will take questions at any time, but especially once we get to the end of our all of 3 speakers. So be sure to start typing your questions in. Thanks again, Christy Leeds. We'll now move to Christy Welch. And Christy is going to talk with us about her agritourism operation as well. Take it away, Christy.
All right, Madeline, thank you so much for allowing me to join the group today and share some of the information about what we do on our farm. And we have heard a lot of great information already from both Gigi and Christy Leeds. And so I hope that there are some things that you can take from our examples today and implement on your farm. We are a pretty small operation compared to some of the other examples you've seen today. We do mainly pick your own strawberries. We do have pick your own blackberries as well, but the winter for the last 2 years has prevented us from having a crop. So hopefully we'll get back to that here in the near future. But our big event is we do plasticulture strawberries, and you can see this is one of our fields here with the row cover on it for the winter protection. And so we have folks come in for about a month out of the year to pick their own strawberries. And so I just, again, wanted to share a few things that we do on our operation to manage risk. And so a couple of things that we'll talk about is the legal structure of your business, insurance, and Gigi already touched on that, signage that Christy touched on, as well as the employee training, and then customer expectations when it comes to kind of that reputation aspect of your business. And so one of the things that I think it is important to do is to think about the legal structure of your business. And there are many options out there. And so you can be anything from a sole proprietorship to a corporation to a cooperative. The nice thing about legally structuring your business in an appropriate manner is it does provide some separation from you individually or personally and the business. And so I do encourage you to contact and consult with your attorney and your tax professional, because one of the biggest things that the legal structure of your business will affect and how you determine that are your tax liabilities as far as the business is concerned. And then the other one, again, depending on your particular situation, which structure might be most appropriate for your operation. And so it is important to get professional advice from both your attorney and accountant to make some of those decisions. In our particular situation, it worked out for us to be formed as a limited liability company, which again, when you legally structure your business in some aspects, such as a limited liability company, in the eyes of the law, then you personally are a separate entity from your business. And that is not the case with all the different structures. So again, talk to that attorney. The second thing that I think is really important to do, and I work with a lot of folks, small farmers that sell direct to consumers and at farmers markets, is to really ensure that you do have the proper insurance in place to protect any assets that you have. And as Gigi mentioned, there are different types of insurance. General liability, product liability, and workers' comp are the ones that I'm going to touch on here for this particular presentation. But the general liability are what we consider trip and fall. And so as you can see, again, this is one of our strawberry fields, and there are some, just being on a farm, you have some natural hazards. This is our irrigation line that can be a hazard as far as tripping is concerned as people are walking in and out of the field. And so typically in a situation like this where you can see that that hose is a little bit up off the ground, we might put a flag there or just make sure when we walk people out to show them where to pick to ensure that they are aware of some of these tripping hazards. This is a sandbag. We have sandbags out to hold our row cover down. I don't know why this particular one didn't get picked up out of the field at this time. As you can see, most of the other ones are gone. But again, it's a natural environment, and so there are things that are going to be natural hazards. And so, again, to make sure that the insurance that you have covers the type of risks that you're trying to manage is important. And of course, the second one for us, since we are selling a consumable product, is product liability insurance. And so if you can see some of these little cuties here that come out and pick our strawberries as well, we have lots of families and friends that come out and pick. And of course, we do everything we can from a food safety standpoint to ensure that we're providing a wholesome product for our customers. But it's important also to manage the risk and make sure that we have that product liability in place as well. And so what you need to be sure and do is have that conversation with your insurance provider and be sure to tell them what it is that you are doing with your operation. not only do we sell product and have the U-Pick operation on the farm, but we also sell at farmers markets as well. And so don't assume that your insurance provider knows what you're doing. Be sure to say that we are selling off the farm as well at these locations to make sure, again, that you have those proper coverages. And I don't think any of us as farmers want to risk the farm if something were to happen and we've come to find out that we didn't have the proper insurances in place. And then, of course, for us, the other thing is the workers' compensation insurance, and this goes along with training. As you can see, we use a lot of equipment. There's moving parts. It's hot, it's cold, it's rainy, all those kinds of things. And so we, in addition to the training that we do for our employees, we try to ensure that we would have the proper insurance in place for them as well in case there is an accident. And of course, we do what we can to try to manage those risks. And in a perfect world, we would not have accidents, but we all know that that's not the case. And so you do need to plan for those things. This is an example of our selling at our local farmers market. And as Gigi mentioned, one of the greatest risks that most of us take every day is getting in a vehicle and traveling down the road. And so, again, it's important to talk with your insurance provider that not only, again, are you selling there on the farm, but we're traveling to and from farmers markets to sell our product as well. And of course, when you're selling a product, you are benefiting. And so you're held to a little bit higher standards than just the general population because you are benefiting financially from the transaction. And so, again, to have those conversations with your insurance provider is really important. Christy touched on this as well, and really signage, again, to tell people where to go, tell people where not to go is a big thing that you can do to manage risk as well. Again, we have a food item, and lots of people think, oh, there's animals on the farm, so I'll bring mine with me. And so we've had to, over the years, really post the fact that we do not allow pets on our farm, and that, if somebody does bring a pet, how do we handle that? So that just takes a little bit of time to get folks educated about why we don't allow pets, because, a lot of us treat our dogs or cats as children, and so especially the dogs, they want to take them with them everywhere they go. And so, again, it just goes back to that education piece. Again, when we talk about not only customers, but again, if we would have to have emergency personnel come onto the farm, do they know how to get in? Do they know how to get out? Do customers know where to park and where not to park? And then this is for those of you that do produce produce, this is a template right off the Food and Drug Administration's website that they recommend that folks wash their fruits and vegetables before eating. And, of course, one of the big questions we get is, can I eat these out of the field? And so it's important that you, as well as your employees, know how to handle answering that question with your consumers, because we certainly want to imply that, yes, it is a healthful food, but we don't want to be, oh, no, you have to wash it before you eat it and this and that, and raise some red flags that maybe aren't actually there. So, again, educating your consumers and your employees is really important. And so, again, we do a lot of training with our employees on food safety. The equipment safety is another thing that we spend some time with our employees on, not in addition to the heavy equipment. It's also mowing and weed eating and those kinds of things. And it's important, again, as Christy mentioned, that they have the proper safety gear, the ear protection, the eye protection, the gloves, and those kinds of things to help them stay safe while they're carrying out the work for us. Weather, of course, is always a concern when you're outside on the farm, and it amazes me the amount of people that want to pick their own strawberries when it's lightning outside. And of course, we do not allow that on our farm. So, but people still want to do it. So, how do we handle that is another situation that we have to inform our customers of our policy and our employees of our policy. And then just safety in general. And of course, we are in a farm environment. And of course, I put this picture of this little fawn that we found in one of our raspberry patches a couple years ago. And so we can encounter wildlife. And wouldn't it be great if it's all cute little fawns that are going to run away as soon as you get close to them? But, in reality, there are other things that happen. You might have a snake, or you might have a mouse, or those other kinds of wildlife. And of course, we do what we can to make sure that we keep them out of the strawberry patch and the blackberry patch. But anytime you're coming in and out of an area like a farm environment, you have the opportunity to encounter some wildlife. And what about skunks? Wouldn't that be terrible if you have this family come out and they happen to get sprayed by a skunk? Thankfully, we haven't had that happen, but it's those kinds of things that you have to keep in mind as well when you're working with your customers coming onto your farm. And then the last thing I just wanted to touch on again, because I do think it is risk management, is your customers' expectations. And so if we talk about product supply, we'll have customers get anxious for us to open for the season, and they'll come out, and of course you'll see some red berries hanging on the side of the bed, and they're like, why aren't you open yet? Look at all those ripe berries. Well, they don't realize that you get a few people going through there and picking those ripe berries, and nothing is more frustrating when a customer takes the time to come to our farm to get the quantity of fresh berries that they want, and there are not enough there. And so this past season, with the winter again the way it was, we had a very reduced crop. I mean, we had probably less than 50% of a normal, whatever that is, year. And so we had to go a little bit and do a little bit more diligence to make sure that we were managing when the customers were coming out to the farm to pick the product. Because again, we have customers that come from all over, and nobody wants to drive an hour to be told, oh, we're out today, you'll have to come back. And so doing what we could to try to manage those expectations and communicate that to our customers, and we did a lot of that through social media. And of course, the price and the quality goes right along with managing those expectations from consumers. And so that's kind of some of the examples from our particular farm, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well. So Madeline, I will hand it back to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Christy. Well, again, another great presentation. You brought up a lot of different ideas as well as some that we've heard previously, thinking about the legal structure and how the business is set up from the beginning to reduce some of those risks, thinking about the insurance that we have available for our business to protect those things that do happen, even though we're taking many precautions. Pets is something I had not thought about. I was out at a pumpkin farm last fall, and there were actually several dogs on leashes at the pumpkin farm, which I was kind of surprised of, but I could sure see how they would not be, that would not be reasonable for a strawberry farm in particular. So a lot of good things to think there. Both of the Christies had some good thoughts about employee safety. So thinking about the employees, those people who are working on the farms, not just those who are coming to visit, was a really important point of the conversations as well. Thinking through some of those what ifs, I think all three of our speakers brought up those, and having a plan ahead of time of trying to go through the agritourism business and think about situations that could happen and planning ahead for what will happen if and when they do happen. So all very, very important points today. So we don't have any questions in the chat box at this time. Do any of you speakers have questions for each other at this time? So one of the things that I heard from our speakers again is thinking about that employee safety as far as the training. And I have a question for Christy Leeds on the employee training. Christy, you talk quite a bit about that. Could you tell us a little bit about the time it takes to train new employees or those that are returning for a season? What kind of investment in training do you give them up front, especially regarding the safety training?
Sure. We do a general training for all new staff. That's that's an evening, about 3 hours. It's an orientation to the farm, not specifically the station they might work at, but where all the people, where the first aid is, what you do in these kind of situations, where key things are located, kind of the overview kind of thing. Then we do some training. Then they divide off depending on what kind of an area they'll be working. If they're working zip line, for example, there's another entire half a day devoted just to kind of a general orientation to working on the zip line. And then they will spend some time at each station and actually work alongside another employee before they're ever completely on their own. They'll be trained by another person at each particular point of operating that particular thing. So they'll spend 8 or 10 hours in training in about 3 different phases before they're completely up to speed where they would be working a station by themselves. In our other kinds of stations, it's somewhat similar depending on what they're doing, but they'll always work alongside somebody who's worked that station. So after they get through the general information and all the kind of the knowledge stuff, and then I go through the station specifically with them, then they'll work alongside somebody who's done that station, so they have an opportunity to kind of see it in action. So many of ours are very action-oriented. It's very hard to just talk about it. You really need to see it in action, to be standing there and doing it. If you're going to teach somebody how to operate the pedal carts, it's really hard to just talk about that in theory until you're right there doing it. And then you say, here's how you show them how to operate the brake. Here's how you show them, here's what you say to bring the next person forward in line, and all those kind of things. There's a lot of specifics involved in each of those stations. So I guess those are just examples. They're so different, and that's where it takes a lot of time to do each section. If you're going to be the barn person around the animals, it's an entirely different training about animals and scooping feed and animal safety and all that than person that's driving the hay rides and person that's operating slides and person that's operating the pumpkin jump and all those kinds of things. But so we do some general things together and then split them off into sections that either one of us are doing and or other experienced employees will be doing some of that training as they get in their specific areas. The other challenge of that is then we tell our staff up front that we really hopefully expect them to be cross-trained in a couple of areas. So then they can't just jump from area to area. They have to have gone through the training to work in that specific area. So that's a challenge for us. We have about 60 people on staff when the farm is up and running, but they start out, all of them, in a particular area, and then ideally they'll get additional training as time permits to move around to some different areas. Most of them like to do that anyway, so they're happy to do it, but then we have to find the time to give them experience in driving or operating a particular thing when there aren't customers around. They have to get that training done before they can simply be assigned to work in that particular area.
Thank you, Christy. Those are really important points you brought up. And this is kind of on the business side of things, but when they are going through that training, is that something that is expected of them before they are able to be employed by you, or do you actually pay them for the hours that you spend training them?
they're actually paid. We don't really begin training until we've hired them. So we do an interview process prior and decide that they're going to be hired, and then we begin the training dates. And some are hired. We do an application type process where they tell us areas that they're willing or interested in working. We kind of make some decisions based on their experience, a little bit on age. Like, for example, on the zip line, they have to be at least 16, a minimum of 16, to work parts of that attraction, that area. So generally, if we do get some 15-year-olds, they're going to be assigned to another part of the farm and do the training in that area. And they may move there at some point in the future. So it's a little bit based on that, might be experience. We have we have a barrel train, or we call it the banana bus. So, and again, there's an age limit and some experience expected. You have to have a minimum of a driver's license to work that area, to drive that. It's actually kind of a lawnmower, a tractor kind of thing. But again, it's a high risk because it's a moving attraction kind of thing that kids are going to be in. So there's some criteria related to some. But yes, we are paying them for the time that they're training. Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Good information there. We have a question about insurance, and I want to go back to you, Christy Welch. You had mentioned that there's different kinds of insurance needed for on and off farm. Could you tell us a little bit more about maybe some of those differences and how that works for you selling strawberries on the farm as well as at the farmers markets?
Sure, I'd be happy to speak to that, and I'll keep in mind that I am not an insurance person professionally, and so I always encourage folks to talk with their agent. But as Gigi mentioned, one of the biggest risks that we take daily is just transporting or getting in a vehicle and traveling down the road. And so one of the things that you have to ensure that when you are traveling to a farmer's market to sell your product, you're going to be on company time, for lack of a better term. And so do you, again, have the insurance, the proper insurance in place? So first of all, who are allowed to drive your vehicles? Do you hire people to go to farmers markets and sell your product for you? And if so, you need to specifically ensure that your policy allows those folks to be driving that vehicle, because that is a significant risk that we all take. And then just, it's different at a farmer's market. There's a lot of different things to think about because you're off the farm. Again, trip and fall, and of course, working with farmers markets, one of the most frequent accidents around the country at farmers markets happens if a big gust of wind comes along, somebody doesn't have their tent properly secured, and that tent goes flying and knocks somebody over or goes into a vehicle or something like that. In addition, then you also need to make sure that you have the product liability insurance in place so that if somebody says that they got a foodborne illness from consuming your product, that you are covered for that as well. And so you just really need to, I think, have a very upfront conversation with your insurance provider and let them know exactly what you are doing so that you can ensure that you're not risking everything that you have.
Yeah, those are good points. We do likewise, and we have our insurance agent on the farm regularly, particularly any time we're thinking about a new activity. In fact, we honestly start there, as difficult as that sounds. But if we're thinking about a new type of activity, if we can't insure it, then we can't do it anyway. So we have to start there and say, here's what we're thinking about doing, here's how it would work. And that's a great point, I think, is that they've got to know what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what, even in the planning stages of as you're thinking about that. But we do that routinely also. So you've got to have somebody that you can work with directly.
Thank you so much, Christy and Gigi. We really appreciate all three of you joining us. It's been really interesting. I know everyone's learned a lot about agritourism and managing the risk involved with that. We are at the end of our time today. even though I'm sure we could continue with this topic. I just wanted to mention that you can either put your email address into the chat box and we will send you a survey, or you can cut and paste, copy and paste the survey link that you see there on the screen now into your browser and take our survey there. The surveys really help us to know what things you are interested in learning more about and help us plan future webinars for you. So thanks again, thanks in advance for taking that survey for us. And thank you again to our speakers, Gigi Neal, Christy Leeds, and Christy Welch, with the Ohio State University Extension, and also working with their own individual agritourism businesses. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. I hope that you all have a great day and wish you all the best in your agritourism businesses. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.